I'm going to give a couple of short little teachings about a couple of different art forms. One is going to be this painting here. I guess it's not a painting. I can ask Carla. Ink on handmade paper. Gate to freedom. Carla, why don't you stand up? Carla is the artist here. Do you
Instead of a painting, I think maybe we could call it an inking.
Inking, okay. An inking. So a couple of short little talks about this and about a different poem. Kind of art, different, on the retreat I led this spring, I used different art forms to kind of help point us in the direction of to deepen the teachings. And I think sacred art always points beyond itself to some other more eternal truth, which I think this inking does. When it first appeared, I was happy to see it because this teaching of Freedom's Gate is I've always I don't know, related to it. You know, Joel did a teaching about it. We were reading. See if I can remember When the Iron Eagle Flies. Reading that book, and it talks about the cyclic existence, and Joel updated it to call it the chain of conditioning. So if you want to read about, he has a chapter in his book, Way of Selflessness, that talks about the chain of conditioning, which I'm going to relate this inking to. And so, anyway, the thing to notice about this is we call it a gate, but is there really anything substantial here? There's an appearance, it appears substantial, but it's space everywhere. And there's none of these things are connected. There's space all around them. The circle here, there's space right through the middle. And so there's all, it's like you could just go up to it and it would just disappear. And so that's kind of on the spiritual path. We call it a gate to freedom. There's an appearance of a gate, but is there actually a gate there? That's something to investigate. And the other thing I like about this is that it's kind of like this is all like a strainer or a sieve, all these lines everywhere. And so another image is to get through this gate, you have to go through the strainer. And what are you straining out is all these aspects of yourself. That whatever you think you are, that's what you have to let go of to go naked through the gate. As Joel's original book was, Spiritual Autobiography is titled. So the grasping mind really has to be let go of. Kind of what we were talking about when we were talking about meditation earlier, and the story of I that we're so involved in. We kind of have to leave that behind, at least momentarily. It's not that it won't appear again, but to go through the gate, you have to recognize it as just another thing arising and passing away. Leave it behind on this strainer here. And everything else, thoughts, emotions, sensations, anything that you think you are, has to be left here at the gateway in order to get through it. And so to kind of, put this in a broader perspective to kind of, where does this Freedom's Gate appear on the spiritual path? I mentioned the chain of conditioning. And so on this chain of conditioning between feelings of desire and aversion and and then grasping and avoiding. That's where freedom, that's where you find the gateway to freedom. And so to talk a little more about the chain of conditioning, to kind of how we get to this point, the reification of self is like the first chain. We reify this boundary between self and world. And so once we have that, we seemingly have a self here and the world out there. And so then phenomena arise, and the mind starts to label phenomena. And by this naming of it, naming any phenomena that arises, we create boundaries. It's an act of creation. Cup. So we've created, it's a concept, but we actually believe that there's a cup here. And if we're not looking at it, the cup is still going to be there. That's generally what we think in the Western world. The mystics invite you to look at that closer, if that is actually true or not. But anyway, anything that arises, we label it, identify it, and then there's a judgment. Is it good or bad, or indifferent? If it's indifferent, we usually just the intention goes somewhere else, moves on. But if it's good or bad, it's usually, almost always, is it good or bad for me? That's the self here. That's where the story comes in. And then desire and aversion. Feelings of desire and aversion arise. Because if it's good for me, then there's a tendency to start to, first, before the tendency to grasp, just the feeling of desire arises. Okay, I want that. It's good. It's something I like. It's going to be good for me. Or it's something that I want to stay away from. It's harmful. I want to avoid that. So that feeling of desire and aversion, and it arises involuntarily. It's kind of based on conditioning or preferences. We like something or don't like something. But then the problem is that we identify with that. We identify that, okay, that's who we are. We are this liking and this disliking. And so the next, then that gives rise to attachments. And that's where suffering, right there is where our suffering comes in. Because once we start to attach to these likes and dislikes, then it automatically leads to suffering, because everything is impermanent. It's going to pass away. So the stronger we're attached to something, it'll give us some temporary happiness, but then it's going to go. Things are going to change. Other things are going to arise. And so then suffering comes into our life. So it's right at this quote-unquote low point of this chain of conditioning where attachment and suffering are set to roll over us. That's also where this gate of freedom appears. Because after these feelings arise, then there's an impulse to grasp or avoid something you dislike. And so it's kind of a subtle difference there, but these feelings are really different than this grasping and avoiding. I mean, you can notice it because you can actually make a choice. You can make a choice to grasp or not to grasp. And there's a tendency, and it almost seems automatic. I like that. I want it. But if you notice, you do not have to do that. I mean, a simple example is I like cherry Danish. So the other day I was walking, or a couple weeks ago, walking through Kiva, and they have a little cabinet there with all the Danish and the donuts and everything. And so there was a cherry Danish there, and I was like, oh wow. See, I labeled it. I identified it as what it was, and then had a desire for it, and so there was a tendency to want to grasp it. But I'd also just been on a vacation where I'd been eating quite a bit and gained like 4 or 5 pounds, and so I was like, oh, I better not. I better avoid that. So I passed on by.
Oh. What did you get instead?
But then I came, but you had to come back by that way again, and I started again. The grasping arose again. But again, I didn't act on it. You have a choice there. I mean, it's. I mean, there's nothing wrong with eating a cherry Danish per se, but it's just to notice anything that you have a tendency to grasp or to avoid. It's what do we call it? From a relative perspective, we call it self-will. A choice can be made. Now, whether it's a self making that's a separate question. But a choice can be made to either grasp it or not to grasp it. And so that's where the freedom is. That is your freedom. It's freedom from that habitual, conditioned pattern of life.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the feeling that when you saw that, the feeling came up, the desire, but the emotion part, you said that's where the suffering is. How would the emotion fall into there or not fall into there?
No, the attachment. The attachment to to liking or disliking something. Claiming that as your own.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's where the...
Oh, there's that cherry Danish. I like that cherry Danish. That cherry Danish belongs to me.
Right.
That would be the...
Right. Yeah. So yeah, so you're gaining freedom from these attachments, freedom from the thoughts, habitually believing and following thoughts. Thought arises, oh, I got to have that. Well, you can make a choice there. A choice can be made. Would be more technically correct. It's you don't have to own that emotion. It's not really you. You can let it arise and let it pass away. And the more you can sever this link in the chain by practicing spiritual detachment. Spiritual detachment is neither grasping nor pushing away. Then the weaker the conditioning becomes and the less suffering you will experience.
So I hear the center using the word detachment a lot, and I come from a tradition that says non-attachment.
Yeah,
So I think of,
that's another good word for it, actually.
well, when I hear Joel describing it, it's like you notice attachment when you do an action, like detach. It sounded to me like you're more operating from a non-attached. I don't know, is there any significant distinction here, or do you think of one as one type of action versus another?
No, I don't think there's any basic distinction because it's you're not actually detaching. It's to have detachment is to be non-attached, at least in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was my little talk on the inking here. Is there any questions? Because I'm going to move on to the poem, and it actually comes back around to the same place here, but we can spend a little time on here. Yeah.
The first thing that came to my mind is that you first have to be aware that you actually have that desire.
Right. Yeah.
Usually it's automatic pilot, you know?
Yeah.
Grab and nut. So that's
Yeah.
where the meditation of just having that still mind,
Mm-hmm.
where you can notice that.
Yeah. That's the first principle is attention. Pay attention.
Pay attention.
And then commitment. No, what's the second one? Detachment or commitment? I can't remember. What is it? Commitment. Second one. Second principle is commitment. You have to be committed to continue to do that. To be, it's like our meditation. We get lost in thought again. We get caught up in the world, but the commitment is, underlying intention to remain as attentive as you can to what's going on. And so you You notice yourself being lost in the world. And so you relax back into the just the present.
Spaciousness of being.
Yeah. And you have to be, again, like detachment or non-attachment, and you practice being non-attached to things that arise. You're everything you think you are. Self-centered desires and aversions. Be non-attached to those. And surrender is our last principle. So it's not really something you do, it's something that you create a space where surrender can happen. So, any other questions about this lovely inking?
I like the Danish thought in the round circle of the gate.
All into the store.
Sorry. It was in
Yeah, that's good. And, the Danish has the corners all, 4 corners tucked in there. Okay. Okay, the next little teaching is going to be on the poem Lost. This poem is by David Wagner, and we talked about it in my practitioner's class. A few people are here that we've talked about it. And David Wagner is, I think he's a poet from the University of Washington. He grew up in the Midwest, and then he moved out to Washington in the 50s, I think. And he's a fairly well-known poet, especially in the Northwest. Of course, I'd never heard of him. I never heard of him until I went on retreat, and one of the students came to talk to me and said, yeah, because we were talking about poems, and I do a little poetry. And she recommended this poem, and so I looked it up, and I was pretty impressed. And when I talked about it in class, there was actually a couple of people in class who this poem had, they run into it years ago, and it really made an impact on them, and so they were happy to be reminded of it. But anyway, I have like 4 copies.
More than enough.
More than enough. It's like the loaves and fishes. It'll multiply. But I'll read it. I'll read it, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Oh, I should say that this actually came out of a book that David Wagner did. He studied Native Americans of the Northwest, and he studied a lot of their teachings and their mythology. And so he wrote a book with his own version of their myths, basically. And I think this was actually about being lost in the woods. And these days, there's a lot of talk about appropriation, cultural appropriation. So I don't know if you'd actually classify this as he culturally appropriated or not, but it's kind of on the borderline. So I want to give the Native Americans their due credit in this poem also. Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breeze. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying here. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So there's a lot of ways you could work with this poem or dance with it, I would like to say. But I'll just focus on the main one is really that instruction to stand still. Not moving away from the now, from the present, from consciousness itself. And if you actually have ever been lost in the woods, you'll recognize that moment. About 30 years ago, I was staying at a cabin at a friend of mine down in Northern California up in the mountains, and there was nobody else around, just my wife and I and our son. And it was kind of late, not late in the evening, but getting toward the late evening, but I decided to take a walk off into the woods. It wasn't a thick woods, it was kind of like a lot of open spaces. But I just took off, going up and down over these hills. All of a sudden it started to get dark, and I turned around to walk back, and it was like, where am I? And if you ever had that feeling, it's like, oh my God. Terror arises, like this could be a life-endangering situation. And so I think what I first started to do was kind of start running around one way or another, trying to find where I had been, where I'd come from. But eventually, I just kind of slowed down and just started thinking about it. Started to stand still a little bit and realized that this clearing where this cabin was a pretty big clearing. So if I knew the general direction of where I came from, so I just had to head back there, and eventually I was gonna find it, and that's what happened. But that also, it's typical of how we interact in our lives. We always want to move away. And then this goes back to the second chain in the chain of conditioning, or the second link, which is chronic restlessness. So whenever you have an instruction or in a situation where it'd be important to stand still, that always brings that chronic restlessness into the light of awareness. And so, like we talked about, the first link in the chain is this reification of this boundary between self and world. So once that is there, then there's always kind of a little bit of anxiety because you don't quite feel at home in the world. It's like you here and the world there. And so there's a little anxiety that's always underlying everything. And that is what the chronic restlessness arises out of. Just a little tendency to move away, to move somewhere. We think happiness is going to be found somewhere besides, just being still. And actually, that impulse that isn't our true home that's true. You aren't a self in the world, the mystics say. You aren't a separate self in the world. And so seeking happiness in things of the world is really futile. It's only going to lead to more suffering because of the impermanence of things. And so what you need to do is become an eternal renunciate. So it's not that you actually have to give up external things of the world, but you have to give up to your belief that happiness can be found in the things of the world. Once you start to see that things are impermanent, just that seeing starts to break that your conditioned habit of if things are impermanent, why am I always grasping them? Like with that beautiful plants, cherry Danish. You know, once you realize that it is impermanent, it'll give me a moment of happiness. But if I want to lose some weight, just let it be there. Let the image of it and the feelings arise and pass away. When I'm lost of weight, I can go back and have the cherry Danish. So you can start to ask yourself questions like, have the pleasures you've moved toward made you permanently happy? Have they ever? Have any pleasures that you've moved toward and tried to grasp even, or have grasped even, have they made you permanently happy? Yeah, somebody said temporarily. Yeah, temporarily, but there's no permanent. Here's what Hindu saint Ananda Moyama says. Everything in this world is transitory, so also worldly happiness. It comes, and the next moment it is gone. If permanent, abiding happiness is to be found, that which is eternal will have to be realized. So, as you stand still and try to let as this poem says, the force find you or the divine find you. What is your main obstacle? Again, it's this chain of conditioning, labeling. The mind starts labeling, identifying. Judgments arise. Judgments about myself and situations, psychological judgments, judgments whether things are good or bad, and feelings of desire and aversion. This whole chain of conditioning starts rolling. And the grasping and pushing away what you like or dislike. So, right back to this freedom's gate here. Just by standing still is going to put you right back to the same place. You notice what your obstacles are. It's all this conditioned patterns, conditioned habits of the mind. So if you can start to sever that link of grasping and pushing away, just let them arise and dissipate. And you can just rest in this, the eternal now that Ananda Moyama talks about.
So from a practical standpoint, you have that sudden fear that you're lost, which is really kind of conceptual because you're not yet lost. The trees weren't lost.
Right.
It says, the forest wasn't lost. And if you can keep your composure, then you have a much better tool to find your way back. But when somebody has that concept of being lost, then they start to panic, run around,
Right.
crazily looking for the right way.
And get more and more
More
lost.
lost. Right, that's,
It's actually what we do all the time. The mind is always following this mind around and around and around, getting more and more lost. Yeah, that's a good comment you made about, the trees and bushes, aren't lost. And so if you can just stand still and notice what is it the trees and bushes do. I mean, they just are. They're just there. They're just, they're not trying to do, they're not really trying to do anything. I suppose you could say they're trying to live in a sense. They're just, they're not trying to be something else, not trying to be somebody else. They're not trying to grasp anything or push anything away. Somebody comes up and cuts them down, they might have some feelings about it, but That's what happens in the world. And like, even if we're lost, even if you don't find your way out and you're going to die, you know. If you're calm, you might as well enjoy your last few moments on Earth rather than tearing around, going crazy. So, any other questions?
Can you read it again?
The poem again? Sure. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. You must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breeze, listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Just one other note here about a way to work with this story of I that we're usually so lost, quote unquote lost. That's actually an interesting concept. But can you actually leave the moment, this eternal moment? Can you escape it? We think we can. I mean, we talk about it that way. Oh, my mind was gone. I don't know where I was. I wasn't in the moment. Yeah, where were you? Indeed. Were you anywhere? I mean, is there anything besides this moment? If there's nothing besides this internal now, how can you escape it? How can you get away from it? But this story of I, one way to look at that is like, it's a phenomenon arising. These thoughts arising and passing away constantly. We string them together to create this story. But what is the foundation on which the notes or the chords or thoughts are adorned?
Could you repeat that, please?
Well, it's another way to kind of get at this stillness. This stillness, things arise, like the story of I, particularly that we're following. The attention goes there all the time. But what is the foundation out of which all these things arise? I guess I was talking about, in class we talked about this story of I as being no different than a bird's, the song of a bird, or the concert or an opera, song that arises. And so what is the foundation on which all these thoughts, notes, chords, and stanzas are adorned? Anything that arises it's like an adornment on the world, a little jewel. But what is the foundation? What did you say, Beth?
Consciousness.
Yeah. Indeed. So, any other comments, questions? I mean, even if you have a question about some other topic, we got a little time here, we could do that.
What about the part in the poem where it says you must ask permission? Did I mishear that?
No, that's what it says. You must treat it as a powerful stranger. You must ask permission to know it and be known. Well, I take that as kind of humility. You know, if you're trying to uncover this, if you're trying to stand still and you think you know where you're going, or you're so anxious that you got to run around and try to find somewhere, well, you're not being present. You're not standing still. So you need to have a little humility to realize that there's something greater than this egoic mind.
Kind of equating the unknown with the greater known. You know, if you want to know, you have to face the unknown.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Don't know mind. The cloud of unknown. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So when you were talking about the painting, and you were saying that, you know, the gate is the place where we have the choice to maybe interrupt our conditioning that goes with the
Mm-hmm.
desire or the resistance. And then you said, but then there's the question of whether who makes the choice? Do we have a choice? You know, how does that work? You said it was a topic for another day, but I wondered if you had anything to say about it.
Well,
How do we, can we decide, and how does that work? Can we choose?
yeah, a choice is made. I mean, if you look at any kind of choice you make. I mean, Joel always talks about going to a restaurant and deciding what food you're going to have. I mean, that's a great place. Great place to look at that decision-making process. And I mean, it's no different than making a choice of whether to grasp something or not to grasp something. You know, you have to be attentive. You have to be very attentive to what's going on. And so this, this cherry Danish. So the tendency is to want to grasp it. But then a decision, I say I made the decision not to grasp it. But there really was no I there. There was no I that made a decision. In my process, it's just thoughts arose, and then a choice occurred. A choice happened. It's kind of like weighing the options. Well, do I want it because it tastes so good, or do I not want it because gain another pound? And I don't want to do that. And so it's like the mind is going back and forth. Thoughts arising, passing away. But is there anybody there? Is there any self there that makes the decision? I mean, again, it's an instruction to go look. Look for yourself. I mean, I've never found any. I've never found a separate self there.
So what kind of choice is there then when you come to the your practices, I guess, of not grasping and not pushing away?
Yeah, it's compassion. Compassion guides your actions. Compassionate for the body, or compassion for others. Your choices are based on what is the greater good of the whole, which includes your body mind. I mean, another way to look at it is this self that we think we are. Bring it to a teacher. Bring this self that you think you are to a teacher, and we'll liberate it. Jane?
I was just thinking, while you were talking about recent experiences that I've had, most of you know that my dog died, and I was very attached to that dog, and I identified with that dog, and it was sort of like I can't imagine going on without that dog. And so there was a part of me that was just really desiring and grasping and wanting to recreate the dog, and I went on all the rescue sites, and I was looking for the dog, you know. And I found a dog that looked very much like my dog. And so I arranged to have a visitation. So the little dog was supposed to come and visit. And it was like a mini dog of my dog. And it was very sweet and very smart, and a lot smarter than my dog. But its head was so small that it could go right between the openings in my fence, which is a significant space of fence. And the rest of the body could follow right after it. And I was able to get it to stay in the yard while I was present. And the other thing was that it was 2 years old, it had been on the streets of Pasadena, they said, and it was not housebroken. And it was really a struggle. It was very quiet, very smart, very loving, did not like to be in the crate at night, and cried and barked. That was the only time it barked, to the point that I, of course, let it out and it came and slept with me. But I realized, you know, that I was trying to recreate my dog Chi, and this wasn't it, and it wasn't going to be it. And so I took him back. And I hope somebody picks up this really skilled at teaching 2-year-old boy dogs not to mark everywhere in the house. Actually, they sent him home with this little belly band thing that put a sanitary pad in it and wrapped it around it. So he was busy marking all over, but it didn't actually mark, you know.
Oh, my
But
God.
I thought, I can't live with this.
Like a doggy diaper.
Yeah, but that was what you were talking about. Just sort of like, oh, wow, that's what was going on. So I think I need to stay still for a while.
He was probably thinking, and this is not the same house that I am.
Rose, you have a question?
I was thinking about the grasping thing, and the avoiding thing. And it isn't so much the grasping and the avoiding as how you feel about it. Like grasping something that is okay for you to grasp, but isn't going to cause any possible problem for anybody else is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Grasping for something that is out of your reach that you're not going to get. It seems to me that is a poisonous thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Because it's kind of built-in suffering. If there's something you can't, quote unquote, can't attain, and you want that, your suffering is just arising continually because you're trying to get something that's unattainable. Yeah,
Or the same be true of avoidance.
yeah, I know, absolutely. Because, a lot of things arise that we wish we could avoid. So we're always trying to push them away. Whether it's an emotion or some situation, well, it's like Jane was talking about, her dog died. So there's for many people, when you have a favorite pet die, there's a lot of aversion there, and you wish that didn't happen.
So that all ties back to love acceptance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Once you're comfortable in all the aversion that arises, once you realize that is, once you accept it,
That's a key.
yeah, that's the gate to freedom. Another gate. Susan.
I'm wondering about the reification of self and how that fits in with the first precept of taking responsibility for your life and how to avoid reification doing that first precept.
Okay. The responsibility. To take responsibility for my life, not to blame others for my own unhappiness, nor make excuses for my own mistakes. That's our first precept. So you want to realize that you're interacting in the world. And so you don't want to blame others, driving in a car is a good example. Somebody pulls out in front of you, you're driving along at whatever, 40, 45 miles an hour. Somebody pulls out in front of you. And you have to almost slam on the brakes to slow down. So the reaction is to like, that fucking asshole. Pardon my French. But your immediate reaction is to blame others, to blame somebody else. And so the precept is saying, whoa, you have a choice there. Again, it's that same choice. It's that because the grasping mind wants to blame somebody else, or it's our conditioning is often to blame others. And so it's to realize, that's automatically going to rise, kind of involuntarily. You want to blame somebody else. But you don't, you have a choice there. A choice can be made to just let that go. That arises and it passes away. And then you're just driving along again. Did that?
Yep.
Okay.
I take it that the
It just,
first precept is so we're responsible for knowing that what we're thinking isn't necessarily true. That it's just a thought. It's our thought. It isn't necessarily anybody else's thought. And so if
Wow.
something happens, that we don't like or that seems to be against us, we can blame the other person, but it's really what's in our minds that's making us suffer.
well, it's actually your attachment to that thought that arises. Because this thought that arises, again, is it really yours? We often talk that way. It's my thought is arising,
Yeah.
but really, if you look at it technically, it's just a thought arises.
Yeah, but nobody else has that thought.
That's another thought arising. That's how concepts. We have this concept of like nobody else has this thought, so I'm unique here. That's all thought. You can never get out of. You can never escape thought by thinking about it. You never get free of it anyway. I don't know if we want to escape it, but we want to be free of habitually following thought, habitually believing it's true. And so at some point you just have to go back and just be still, stand still. Let the thought arise and pass away. What's there? David, you had a question?
I don't know if I could tie in what I was thinking with what's going on right now, but I still have a friend named Jeff, who 10 or so years ago was going through a divorce, and he was beating himself up for his desires and his aversions, and he was trying very hard to control those things and to get rid of his desires. It was a difficult time for him because not only was he taking responsibility for his desires and aversions, which we should do, but then he was actively trying to get rid of them. And maybe on a self-improvement sort of tact, that's a nice thing to do. But on a spiritual sort of route, I don't know if Jeff made it through. Because he started to become numb and started to be not responsive to the world around him and kind of checked out. So as we talked about getting rid or having these desires and aversions, it's not that they are bad. Not that they can be destructive to people and ourselves, but it's our thoughts about them and our attachments to our attachments, our reification of those attachments and desires that we think add up to a separate individuated self. So I'm just passing along a cautionary tale about getting rid of desires.
Yeah. Again, it is that attachment to the desires is what causes the suffering. Again, it's desires and aversions, they arise involuntarily.
Yeah.
And they're just there. And so, like somebody said, acceptance. It's just accepting that that's there, but we don't have to continue going down that road or playing that program. And again, if there's nothing wrong with doing things that that we like or are averse to. Again, it's the attachment to it. If it causes suffering, then it's a good clue to just let it arise and pass away. Again, it's easier said than done. You actually don't have to do anything. You just have to notice it and just let it be there, and it's going to go away on its own. It's going to self-liberate. But it's easy, but not. No, it's simple, but not easy. Let's say that. Yeah. Laura.
I notice that the times that I am mindful, I've noticed that it's a situation with somebody else, and I want to react to the way I have painted that person, kind of thing. And if I notice that, like I'm getting irritated or something, or I'm thinking, oh, she's always blah, 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 or blah, 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 then if I just stop for a minute, it seems like there's a spaciousness there. There's more compassion towards the person, and I don't really feel like I've made a decision about what to do, but something happens, and it's usually a good thing.
Yeah.
But that noticing, that automatic pilot is so ingrained, It's just like you push the button and there you go.
Right. And just like you said, if you're just able to stand still and let a little more space be there, usually a more compassionate or loving response.
Or I see the other person.
Yeah. You're not caught up in your self-centered wishes and desires. You're more open to whatever's going on around you. Okay. Well.
You want to mention foundation?
Oh yeah. Foundations classes begin in the fall, around the end of September, 1st of October. We ask, people who are interested, you can sign up on a sign-up sheet that's just expressing an interest. Probably in August, early August, we'll, if you're still interested, we'll have a more informational meeting to explain more about what the class is involved with. But we ask anybody who's new, who hasn't been in any of our classes, to take a foundation class and kind of get in touch or kind of get familiar with what the center teaches. The meditations and the 10 selfless precepts, and just integrating all the different religious traditions, how the mystics of all the religions are saying the same thing. That's the basis of the class, but you can sign up, put your name up there, and we'll have the informational meeting in August, and then you'll still have like another month or so to think about it, and then end of September the class will begin.
So, just for, I'm if people's interested, are they gonna continue to use dual book foundation, for the foundation class?
Yeah.
That's the way it's up.
And for the donation box, like David mentioned, we have a beautiful building here, and I guess the intention of the center, the board, is to to present these teachings and carry them forward to be of help to people now and generations in the future. That's like our ultimate goal, anyway. So if you can afford to give us a small donation, we will be more than happy to put it to good use. Until I meet again, peace to you all. Oh no, there was one other thing I forgot. I was going to do this little song. Just kind of a little actually we did this at retreat. Annie taught it to us, and Rick there helped played his guitar. It's just I'll say it first and then sing it. Go in beauty, peace be with you, till we meet again in the light. And we just repeat that 5 or 6 times. So I'll sing it once and see how good I do, and then you can just join in on the second time. Go in beauty, peace be with you, till we meet again in the light. Go in beauty, peace be with you, till we meet again in the light. Go in beauty, peace be with you, till we meet again in the light. One more time. Go in beauty, peace be with you, till